Good evening and welcome to the third and final Democratic presidential primary debate. I'm Charles Breslin, former chair of the Democratic Party, and I'm joined by my co-moderator, Senator Terrence Wall.
Good evening to everyone who is tuning into this special event. Tonight we are joined by all three candidates for the Democratic nomination for president. However, before introducing them, it is important that we inform everyone watching tonight of the basic rules and guidelines. Tonight's debate will be separated into two different segments. The first segment will consist of general topic questions answerable by all candidates. The second segment will consist of directed questions targeted at specific candidates.
Each candidate will be given a minute and 30 seconds to answer questions. None of the candidates on stage have been informed as to the topic nor the content of any of the questions. If a candidate's name is invoked during discussion, they will have the opportunity for a 30-second rebuttal or counter statement. We politely ask that all candidates remain civilized and respectable during the debate and that nobody is impugned or constantly berated.
Now, please welcome to the stage Vice President George Kaine, Attorney General Colten Warren, and Senator from Missouri Ramsey Clark.
Good evening to all of the candidates. We will first begin with opening statements. By random selection, Senator Ramsey Clark will go first.
Thank you. Mr. Breslin, Mr. Walsh, and the American people. Firstly, I'd like to apologize sincerely for not being able to attend the previous debate due to miscommunication. Now, tonight, we are going to be giving responses to a whole collection of questions. The questions will most likely be in connection to foreign affairs, military, development, justice, activity, and many more relevant issues. That's just the complexity of our politics. With every concern that you have, if elected, I am for overall adequate improvement. If elected, with the administration that I have established with proper authentic opinion from the public, we would efficiently halt creating more issues that our nation does not need. We need to look back and notice what policies, laws, departments, and etc. need dependable repairing. Then, once my and your administration completes that goal, we would develop items and such that would make our group more exceptional that our nation has ever seen before. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clark. Vice President Kaine, your opening statement.
Good evening, and I would like to thank both Mr. Walsh and Mr. Breslin for hosting tonight's debate, my opponents and dear friends for joining me this evening to debate the issues that this country faces, and I would also like to thank those watching for tuning into tonight's debate. Tonight, we're going to tackle two very important questions: what kind of country we want to be and what kind of future we want to build together. During this debate, I look forward to tackling the difficult questions about the future of this nation and my plans to continue to progress it forward. America faces challenging times, and it needs a leader with solutions to the problems that this nation faces that are serious. I look forward to having a spirited debate. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm speaking proper English. And I look forward to working hard to earning the vote of each and every citizen and taking my message to all Americans. Thank you.
All right, and Attorney General Warren, your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Breslin and Terrence, for hosting this debate today. I have a very simple message. It's to send a message to Washington and to work for you, the people. In recent months, I've done things such as Attorney General, MPD Chief, and we've seen tremendous success resulting from my work there. And I don't like to brag, but that's the truth. And I think that we need someone leading this country who's willing to think the same way, reform policy in the same way, and finally ensure that every American has a voice at the table. That's the entire goal of my campaign. It's a very simple one, and I hope that we can get this past the primary and into the general, because I believe the American populace is ready to hear this message.
Thank you to all three of you. We will now proceed to the first segment of this debate. As mentioned prior, the first segment of the debate will be made of general topic questions answered by all candidates.
Currently, the United States is filling multiple less demanding positions with the same people to ensure all departments stay active. In the previous debate, Vice President Kaine suggested people could join groups like the Department of Commerce as side jobs, but certain officials are going beyond this. Leaders of entire departments have been taking positions, official positions outside of the government. For example, Attorney General Warren has enlisted the Marines in addition to his role at the Department of Justice. What is your stance on high-ranked executive officials holding multiple important positions, and how do you avoid taking it too far? And this question will first go to Vice President Kaine.
Thank you for this important question. What I think is vital in the executive branch is if you're assigned or appointed to a high-level position, such as Attorney General, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, any of the key cabinet positions, department, director of the FBI, that should be your first priority, is focusing on the department of agency that you were appointed to lead. What I also think is important, if we see that there are issues within this group, such as an issue with immigration ranking and things of that nature, that these people who are active and have the capability to go in and take these positions to help further make this group thrive in a fashion that is necessary to continue to allow this group to operate day to day. So I think that what we need to do is make sure that if we continue to expand opportunity and allow people to have a second jobs, that their first job is not neglected. And if they do happen to take a second job within either the public or the private sector, that it be a job that will not deter their ability to focus on the priorities that they have firsthand, but also make sure that if they do get a job, that they are active with it as a side job to help with the day-to-day operations of this group. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Attorney General Warren, would you care to comment on this question?
Well, seeing as this question was obviously very targeted towards me, I'm ready to answer it. I expected that many of the debate questions would be targeted towards me, but the answer to it is, whenever I was a senator, I sponsored a constitutional amendment and authored that constitutional amendment to allow members of Congress to serve active duty in the military, because I didn't see the point of them serving in the reserves, and when they get called to active duty, they have to resign their congressional seat. It makes no sense. We're basically training people that will never go out into the field and actually do anything. So I took it upon myself to write the constitutional amendment. Later on, we expanded it to say that any Senate-confirmed office you can't serve in if you're a member of Congress. So I have no problem with people serving in both the military and as, say, myself as Attorney General, because they're doing what they think is the best. If they can handle their job and do that, there's no problem with it. But I wouldn't have enlisted myself into the military if I didn't think I could do both. So the idea that people can't do both jobs is kind of ludicrous, because the military at max, I'm spending 3 or 4 hours of my week doing that, and as Attorney General, it's kind of slowed down due to D-season activities. So I thank you for the targeted question, but I do think that people should be able to work outside of just one job, especially since we have so few people to do so.
All right, and lastly, Senator Clark.
Thank you. This is definitely an interesting question. Firstly, I'd like to thank Mr. Warren and his service to our military, and that no one should be refused to serve in the military. For example, if you're the Secretary of State and a federal judge, that doesn't work out. That's just not how our group is. And to add, I believe we should create legislation to establish a joint congressional committee to look over individuals that have more than one job, though that committee should have the power to approve as such. Finally, that committee's power shall be limited. They do not have the final say. It should be the individual who believes if they have the time to have more than one job, then that's it. Thank you.
Are we going to have an open debate on this?
We can if you'd like.
If the candidates would like to have an open debate.
I'd like to bring up a couple of points and before we move on. First, I don't necessarily agree that this was somehow a targeted question. I do think that I agree with what the Attorney General said in the aspect that if you're in a position and you have the time to devote to a second position, you should have the capability to do so. And I applaud the Attorney General and many others who have taken on the awesome responsibility of joining the armed forces and our men and women in uniform and protecting and preserving our values both at home and abroad. Another concern that I have is something that Senator Clark brought up that I wrote down in regards to this committee. I don't think that we need a congressional committee to oversee and dictate whether or not an individual is capable or not to hold a second job. For instance, if you're an administration official such as the Attorney General, I'm just using you as an example, Mr. Warren. If the president believes that the Attorney General is neglecting his duties to carry out his duties, then I'm sure that the president will sit down with him and say, hey, at least I would as president sit down and tell him, hey, you need to be doing your job, and if you don't do so, I will find someone that will. But I don't think that this is necessarily an issue, because I think that right now what we see in this country is a lack of participation within several departments because there's a lack of interest, such as immigration, such as within the DSS that most recently shut down. There is not a lot of interest. So if we give people that have the ability to be active to take positions in agencies that aren't major positions, then I think that would be beneficial for the activity of our group and also the day-to-day operations of this group as well.
Does anybody else wish to add to open debate?
Well, I would like to say that in response to Senator Clark's claim that this isn't targeted at all, my name was mentioned in the question. Automatically it is, and that's all.
I didn't say anything about it.
Well, that was me, but I think that they used you as an example, not necessarily as a target.
I would just like to clarify, Attorney General Warren, we used your name as an example because you are a good example for this, and you are on stage right now. It is not a targeted question. We also mentioned Vice President Kaine's name in the question as well. It is not a targeted question. It is a general fact.
Sure.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. As we're all aware, the United States is a participating member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. With the size of NATO at an all-time low, as President and Commander-in-Chief, how will you assist NATO and work with our partner nations to bring it back to its previous strength? Mr. Attorney General, we'll begin with you.
You were cutting out for me. My internet's bad because of hurricanes over me, so could you repeat that?
Of course. As you're aware, the United States is a participating member of NATO. With the size of NATO at an all-time low, as President and Commander-in-Chief, how will you assist NATO and work with our partner nations to bring it back to its previous strength?
Well, I believe we touched on this, both Vice President Kaine and I, in the last debate, and we came to kind of consensus. But the idea is, if this NATO doesn't start working out, I don't think we should replace it, but I think we should elect new leadership to it. And if it were to not work after that, obviously we would pursue other options. But coalition building is something that I've done before. Intended example would be Cuba, and people will dog me for this, but it's the truth. We brought together about 300 men compared to the Cuba's like 11. So we need somebody strong enough to basically be commanding to these other world leaders, to someone with enough influence to bring back NATO. And the U.S. needs to take a very big leadership position in this, seeing as we're the one with the strongest military within NATO. So somebody needs to come in there. The Secretary of State and I would immediately work to either say we're going to leave NATO because it's ineffective, or we're going to reform it. And I believe we're aiming towards reform at this point. So I do think that NATO's reform is important, but at the same time, it wouldn't affect us if we left it.
All right. Wait, I just got off my cue cards for a minute. All right, Senator Clark, your response.
You say me. You cut out.
Senator Clark,
Yes,
your
Senator
response.
Clark.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Our alliances, and especially NATO, shall be a top priority for my administration, especially for the Department of State. Firstly, creating a new group or finding a new one is a waste of time and funds. We need to discuss this situation with other world leaders to prominently rebuild NATO and make sure it doesn't fail again. Leaving the organization would basically show that the United States is unwillingly trying to leave row nations, or it just basically shows that we are not willing to commit. And a prime example is NUSA, how Surprise Party said that they're better off without the UN. We do not want to become that. We do not want to be based off of that image. And I believe that, especially with like organizations that bring countries together, is a good way of making new allies. That is all. Thank you.
And Mr. Vice President, your response?
Thank you. I'd like to state I happen to believe that right now, at this current moment, from the intelligence that I have gathered at the current moment, that NATO in its current form is ineffective. And what I would do as president is I would get in, I'd work with my Secretary of State, and I would also have an ambassador to NATO, because I think that that's important to have someone dedicate their time to NATO, because it's a military cooperative organization that deals with conflicts, resolving conflicts, and aiding allies whenever conflict arises. What I think is important is if, for instance, if a military conflict happens to arise within NATO, and I don't know the specifics behind the current charter of this NATO, but if we are a part of NATO, I think that we should go to the aid of our NATO allies if they're dragged into conflict, to try to help aid them to the best of our ability. But what I also think is important is if NATO is not working in the way that it is supposed to, that we need to get in there and we need to reform it, such as put new leadership in the position, ratify a new charter that explains that all NATO members must be committed to this organization and taking part in conflict and aiding the allies within the organization, because NATO essentially is a big organization of military allies. So I don't think, I disagree with Senator Clark in the aspect that if we pull out of an organization such as NATO that we see that is not beneficial to what that we would be seen as retreating from the international community. I think that it's important that we show our commitment to NATO by trying to reform it. But if it fails, then we need to sit and explore other options of coalition building with military cooperative organizations and such. So thank you for the question.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vice President. I know this next question had been asked in the first debate, but it's an important topic, and many voters have requested that we re-ask this. Should you lose the party's nomination, will you support the party's nominee, whoever it may be, or will you seek an alternate route to continue your campaign? This question first goes to Senator Clark.
I still stand with my opinion that I said in the first debate. I believe that I cannot stand to a promise that I cannot keep. If, say, it is a person that I support or myself that wins the primary, and if they continue with the track that they're keeping right now, which everybody in this debate has been keeping a positive track, of course I would have voted for them. But if they went off to like a negative sidetrack, then I would not vote for them.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Your response?
I would like to state for the record that I believe that what I said in the previous debate that this was discussed at was taken completely out of context. The point that I was trying to make in the first debate, whenever this topic came up, is if I believed that the Democratic Party's process was unfair, that there is a possibility that I would explore other options. However, at this current moment, with the way that things have been set up, the campaigns that have been run, I think that this process has been very open and fair. And I also think that either one of my opponents would make a better president than the individual who won the Republican nomination, Mr. Gatsby. I think Mr. Warren and Mr. Clark would do, if I don't happen to win the nomination, I think they both would do a better job than Mr. Gatsby. And I think that if we are going to unite this country, it's also important that we unite this party. So thus far, I think the process has been very fair and open, and if Mr. Warren or Mr. Clark happen to win the nomination, they will have my full backing. I think that's important because I think right now we are at a critical crossroads of what kind of future that we want to build, and I think that either three of us on this stage have a better vision for the future of how we're going to unite this country and build it and progress it forward than our opponent on the Republican Unitarian side. So thank you.
All right, Attorney General Warren.
Well, I've made the statement several times in the past. I will support our nominee at the convention. And I will, in fact, ask any delegate that is trying to vote for me to instead vote for who the nominee is. So my belief is that we should support the Democratic nominee no matter what. As I do think that the Democrats do still have a chance and do still have a vision that isn't lost. And many people would disagree with me on that, but I just don't believe we're done yet.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Warren. And now the final question of this segment. Next week, there's a contentious congressional race which may determine the fate of the Democratic Party in both houses. In the event that the Democratic Party loses its majority in the Senate and maintains their minority in the House, how do you plan on working with the majority party to ensure a Democratic agenda is achieved? Vice President Kaine, we'll begin with you.
Thank you for the question. I believe this is a very important question because I think that right now what we see in this country is deep division. After the Democrats lost the majority in the House of Representatives, I made it my mission as Vice President to try to work with members of both parties in both the House and the Senate to come to a consensus on how we can work together to tackle the challenges that we face as a nation. And I think that's an important quality that the President must have. What I think we need to do as a president is we need to work together with these members no matter what. And I don't think that we need to necessarily progress forward a Democratic agenda because we don't live in a conservative America or a liberal America. We live in the United States of America. And I think that that is something that we happen to forget a lot of the time, is that we are a united country. And it is important that no matter if we are a Democratic president, a Republican president, or independent president, that we make it our priority to try to seek compromise and seek ways that we can work together. Because if we are going to get anywhere as a country, we have to work together. And I think that's something that is vital to continue to progress this nation forward.
All right. Attorney General Warren, you may begin.
Well, as Attorney General, whenever I needed to pass legislation, I've done it bipartisanly. It's been more opposition from my own party than from Unity or anyone else. So I do think that I have the ability to work with any party other than the Democrats if they do take the majority. I also think that we should start by doing things that we can all agree on, bipartisan measures, such as the Your Freedom Act, which I passed to this Congress, which guaranteed the right that you will not be detained for more than, I believe, 48 hours without charges, because it's completely unacceptable whenever people sit in prison for a week without being charged, and it's happened so many times. And I confronted party leaders on both sides, and we got that passed, I believe, unanimously in both chambers. So I think the best way for us to move forward is through starting with things that we can all agree on, such as that act, or trying to help our military, because I know both sides are aiming towards that. We don't have to start with the most divisive things that we have on our agenda. We can start with things such as giving law enforcement the tools they need, or the military the resources they need.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Senator Clark, your response.
Thank you. If elected, bipartisanship would be such an important domestic political aspect to my administration. I do not believe that we should wait, 2 weeks to work with the Republicans and or the Up Party. We should start now, because earlier the better. Though I have been a part of Congress quite a handful of times, and I am no alien to talking with other members of different parties. If elected president, I would individually talk to Congressman myself about passing legislation that is vital to our country. That is all. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. And this concludes the first segment of the third and final Democratic primary debate. We will break for a quick 5-minute intermission so the candidates can. We will begin promptly again at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome back to the third and final Democratic primary debate. We will begin our second segment, which consists of directed questions targeted at specific candidates. If all candidates are ready to proceed, we will begin. The first question goes to Senator Ramsey Clark. Senator Clark, compared to the rest of the candidates on stage, you have a very small platform, little public recognition, and no major accomplishments throughout your tenure in public service. Since you have the eyes and ears of the public tonight on the stage, can you tell us and the American viewers why they should vote for you in this upcoming primary election, and if you are to become the party's nominee, the general election?
Well, it's not based off of the quantity I can provide. It is the quality I can provide. If I can get the promise out to voters that I will deliver such and such, they will get them. And per se, the way of saying that I have not to do much during my public tenure is a false. I have been a part of several major events this group has partaken in. I have attempted several things that I can name all of them, but that would take forever. Excuse me. And being able to compare myself to George Kaine and Mr. Kaine, and Mr. Warren. Of course, I have not done as much as they had, and I respect them for all that they've done to this group. But being an veteran of this group, I know the ways of this group. I know the way how politics work. I know how things just go out, and I believe that with the knowledge that I do have, I will be able to enforce a prominent, adequate, and proficient administration.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Now to Vice President Kaine. Last night, General Reinhardt ceased his support of your campaign and endorsed your opponent on stage here, Mr. Warren, following his accusations of you attempting to strong-arm the military into shifting ownership of the Navy and Marine Corps from the Chief Naval Officer to an overseer or the founder. Even though the matter has since been resolved, and even though you released a statement regarding the situation last night, for those of us who did not read your press release, and for the record, please tell us and the voters at home again what your intentions were and your thoughts on the situation.
So what happened last night, I hope I have a few minutes to explain this, because I think this is a very complicated situation that was thrusted upon us. Yesterday evening, the founder, Mr. Clements, contacted me and made me aware of a concern of his that the Navy and Marine Corps groups were not in his possession, and asked me to relay the information to the Secretary of State, Mr. Reinhardt and Mr. Corbett. So I joined a chat with them, and I told them verbatim what Mr. Clements had said, that if they did not do so before midnight, the Secretary of Defense would end up in prison. I did so because I did this as a friend, and also did so because I think that it is necessary that whenever issues arise, that there is someone trying to mediate this process. So in the process of all of this, I added Mr. Clements to the conversation, and things got very heated between Mr. Clements, Mr. Corbett, and Mr. Reinhardt, because they did not see eye to eye on the issue. But however, one of the biggest concerns that I have, that was the charge that was brought against me, that somehow I don't support the military, that somehow that I have tried to strong-arm the military. Those charges against me are absolutely appalling. No one is perfect. And yesterday, this situation that ensued, I think, shows that there is a lot of division in this country. And my goal as president will be to try to mediate through tough times like this and try to bring forth resolution. However, I think that to address the charges that were made against me, that I'm somehow against the military, I've said this a minute ago, I was very upset because I have worked diligently to try to earn the support of members of men and women in uniform, because I think that the job that they're doing is vital to the success of this group, and it's vital to keep us on the international stage, and it's vital to keep us as a key figure in international organizations. And I deeply respect and admire the hard work the General Reinhardt, Admiral Corbett, the Secretary of Defense, people like Justin Baker and Heather Wellesley have done for our military. And the fact that yesterday, that this slanderous accusation that somehow I do not support the military because I try to intervene in a discussion or an argument between Mr. Clements and Mr. Reinhardt is absolutely appalling to me, because what I was trying to do is mediate through this process, and it wasn't me trying to strong arm the military at all. And I'm very upset that this accusation has been made, and I've tried to set the record straight since.
All right. Thank you, Vice President Kaine. Mr. Attorney General.
Okay.
We can do open debate at the end. Mr. Attorney General, this question is for you. During your tenure as Vice President, President Greene took a short leave of absence, which rendered you the acting president. Following your ascension, several members of the cabinet resigned and the executive branch fell apart for several hours before the acting presidency was eventually passed down to Speaker Mitchell. This event established a perspective among many Americans that you are a divisive figure who is incapable of maintaining order. Did this event give us a glimpse into a potential Warren presidency?
Well, I do love this question as well. It's already been asked a couple times, but I'll answer it again, I guess. That same chaos won't happen again. Those members of the group have since fled, a majority of them, or are no longer within the government, and they wouldn't be hired in my cabinet anywhere, simply because they are the ones who cause these issues, and not they were the ones who started it, is what I want to say. So they wouldn't be hired into the cabinet, and if they did it from, say, Congress, which they aren't in the group anymore, they wouldn't have near as much reach on that. But I believe many people said that I handled the situation correctly by stepping down whenever it was needed. I could have just fired them all and sent the cabinet into chaos and hired who I thought should be in the cabinet, but I didn't, because I truly did believe that was the best thing for the nation, and it turned out it was the right thing to do. I do remember basically being forced by yourself, Mr. Walsh, to abdicate the presidency in a way, and I did so simply because I didn't want the repercussions to be worse. It wasn't what I wanted to do, but I thought it was the best thing for the nation in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Senator Clark, this next question is for you. What will be your plans to fix activity domestically in our departments and community-related games? And do you believe an administration under you could fix this issue, even though at times you yourself are inactive and rarely seen in-game or at community social events?
Well, this current administration fails at that. They fail at advocating to go to D.C. I don't even remember when the last press conference was. Under an administration, every member of the administration would constantly advocate, be like, hey, in the Discord, they'd be like, hey, you want to go to DC? Everybody come here. And development concerning that is also a big aspect. But the thing is, the government should never have control over development. That is always a thing under Mr. Turing. And when it comes to getting activity, it's also a business. And the commerce, nothing has been done. The administration has done nothing. But in my administration, we would literally contact CEOs of the business community within Roblox to ask if they would willing to put a store. And I know businesses out there want to have this, and it would bring lots of activity for our maps. And we also got to let things flow. We got to let, such as the Supreme Court, they need cases. So we got to stop, I wouldn't say not stop solving them, but we got to have them take control of it. We have to have federal courts. And I applaud Mr. Warren for giving plenty of cases to the federal courts and such. So that is all. Thank you.
Are we going to have an open debate on this topic?
On this specific topic right now? Yes, we can have open debate.
I'd like to bring back to the question that was directed towards Mr.
Kaine. We will have open debate on this question we just answered, and then we can go back to the previous question.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to make a statement in regards to what Mr. Clark said, that somehow that this administration has been inactive and ineffective and essentially danced around the question of what he would do to try to improve activity within the group. You know, it's easy for an individual who has never held the presidency or a high-stakes position to sit and throw rocks at the glass castle that is the presidency, that is the executive branch, and to sit and chastise these individuals for not doing enough. I think that the president, the attorney general, the secretary of state, many of the members of this administration have done their due diligence to try to bring this group together and to make it active. But the issue that we see at this current moment is a great division within this group that needs to be solved. And maybe the administration could have done better to try to bring people together. But I think that it's easier for people to sit and throw rock at the administration because they're not doing enough and try to provide these statements that somehow we're not doing enough, and then try to dance around the question essentially and not provide any basis of how they're going to make this group active. And I look forward to addressing this question more specifically, but I think that this needed to be said.
Well, Mr. Kaine, the president specifically tasked you to advocate of the commerce,
it's pronounced commerce, not commerce.
I think I am foreign. So, anyway, he tasked you. What have you done? Because, I don't see anyone in our maps right now.
What does commerce have to do with activity, Mr. Clark? Can you clarify this?
That was the president's.
I'm asking you a question. What does commerce have to do with activity? Because commerce, I think that if you're an educated individual, commerce has something to do with business and opportunity within the map, and activity is you going to a game and being active within it.
Right. But my question for you is, what have you done when the president specifically tasked you to advocate for that week directly towards activity?
What have I done in regards to try to promote activity? Is that what your question is?
Yeah, because the president tasked you.
What we have done, currently we're still in the process of trying to set up the activity and the economic council, Mr. Clark. My big initiative that I'm trying to push through this council, whenever the members of it are a tad bit active and once we get it together more fully, is to try to expand this group and seeking endeavors and building a new city. Right now, the activity in the map has not improved a lot, but I think that what we're going to try to do in this committee is try to find ways that we can fix some of the developmental issues that individuals have within the map of Washington, D.C. You know, you can't snap your finger and make a wish that somehow everything is going to be better and activity is going to be fixed and the Department of Commerce is going to be fixed and everything is going to be fixed. Policy and trying to do the nuts and bolts of government takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. And this accusation that somehow we have not done anything within this committee is absolutely false, because we have tried to work together to come to consensus of how we can fix activity within the group and also try to expand it, Mr. Clark. I hope that answers your question.
Well, you're saying that the committee is still under development, but this plan was released by the White House July 28th. It is now August 24th. Nothing has happened.
Well, you know, Mr. Clark, would you like to be a part of that committee? Because the issue that we are currently having is a lack of interest with individuals joining this committee. So if you're going to sit there and try to chastise me on this issue, then I invite you to join this committee and try to get more people like I have been trying to join this committee, and we can sit down and work together on how we're going to fix this issue, since you seem to be bubbling with ideas of how you are going to fix activity, Mr. Clark.
Well, I mean, this was it was a targeted question, but, I mean, we're free to allow, and I did aforemention my plan, but if you're formally inviting me, so be it. I'll be glad to join.
Well,
It's
okay,
wonderful.
so I do thank Senator Clark for mentioning my good work within the DOJ, and I posted a screenshot within the last 2 minutes of what I've done for DC's activity in the USA Journal chat. But from what I saw in Mr. Clark's answer, it wasn't about what he would do. It was him thanking me for doing it, and basically giving us non-answers on everything. I think that's the real problem. I think that the activity in Economic Council was a good step to take, and I do recognize the same problems that Vice President Kaine faces, which is non-interest and actually doing it. I had the same problem with my Judiciary Reform Council, which I had big plans for and never took fruition, simply because of the partisan divide and also the non-interest. So I don't blame Mr. Kaine for the inactivity of his council, and I do think that instead of attacking Mr. Kaine, Mr. Clark should actually focus on a real solution to activity and not just saying what we all say.
Okay, we're going to move on to a previous question that was asked for open debate regarding the situation with the military, specifically the Navy and the Marine Corps.
Right. If you guys don't mind. Mr. Rainey, Mr. Gordon. All right. The military is one of our most important aspects of our nation. They protect us. They help protect our allies when needed be, train undeniably, and carry out the interests of the United States. I have the uttermost respect for the military. Everyone in the military right now deserves a shout out because their effort is absolutely great. I believe that they should get the most attention because it is the key to our recognition within the Roe Nation community. Without it, we are weak, and we are certainly not the United States. If elected, the Department of Defense and the high command staff of the military would be the people who have the adequate knowledge, the prominent experience, and the top-rate service. Now, I believe it is completely appropriate for the military to be foreign from all major politics of our nation. This being, we also have to protect our servicemen and women from getting embroiled in things they don't need to. As seen last night, it causes drama that is unneeded, and we cannot afford to lose our members of the military. With this, I will be proposing an amendment to the U.S. Code and the Constitution in order to protect our servicemen and women from instances like this. To add, I believe that the military should be independent from politics. With the right leadership established into their command, they will be able to set the road their own.
Okay. So I'm glad that you gave more non-answers, but it really doesn't fix anything. Whenever you're just saying, let's protect our servicemen. We all want to do that. That's the goal of everybody in this group, is to do that. I don't see the point of just saying stuff like that and then not actually giving a solution. The solution instead is to continue thinking outside of the box and to continue working for our soldiers in a way that we're not just saying, oh, let's protect them. I'm glad you're actually presenting something for the first time, but other than that, there's nothing else that I heard from you that actually benefits the group itself.
Well, it would benefit the group because it's protecting from an
what exactly are we protecting them from, Mr. Clark? Because you use platitudes and stuff of your ideas, but you don't offer any specifics. Like, I can sit and say some general statement that sounds wonderful as a talking point, but you don't have any specifics as to what you're going to do to try to protect them. So what is it? What are you going to do, Mr. Clark?
So last night, Mr. Reinhardt and Mr. Corbett...
Yes, we're all aware of the situation.
Let me complete. Okay, thanks. They threatened to leave, okay? And then the amendment that I'm proposing to the U.S. Code and the Constitution would indirectly and directly protect them from even getting involved in things such as politics. And you saying that I have no solution to be proposed is a complete flaw.
Well, let's move to the basis of what the question is of how we're going to. I think that the basis of the question, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Breslin, is how we're going to help the military out. Am I correct?
If you would like, I could repeat the entire question.
Well, let's repeat the entire question because I think all of us are completely off topic right now, and we need to narrow the focus back in a little bit.
The question was, last night General Reinhardt ceased his support for your campaign, Mr. Vice President, and endorsed Mr. Warren following your accusation of you attempting to following his accusation of you attempting to strong-arm the military into shifting ownership of the Navy and the Marine Corps from the CNO to an overseer or founder. Even though the matter has been resolved and you did give a statement, please tell the voters at home again what your intentions were and what your thoughts are on the situation.
Well, I expressed what my intentions were, and I went into great depth about it. But what I think we need to focus more narrowly on is what we're going to do to improve the military. And I don't know if this is a question that is later on or not, but I think right now what we need to do is to continue to empower the men and women in uniform, allowing members of Congress to serve as reservists, allowing individuals who might not be a part of this group due to lack of group space or whatever, to take lower ranking positions within the military. I think that's a good policy. I think that it's important that we keep a strong and stable command structure that the military has currently under the leadership of Mr. Reinhardt and Mr. Corbett, and many other wonderful individuals who help lead the Navy and the Marine Corps. I think they do a phenomenal job. And I think that what we need to do as Commander-in-Chief is not sit, or even with the Secretary of Defense, we need to appoint someone to the position who's going to listen to the concerns of the military and try to help them out along the way to resolve their issues, instead of sitting and trying to, as a Commander-in-Chief or a Secretary of Defense, and dictating policy that they must do. Because I think that whenever you have a military that has the ability to operate freely, not necessarily outside of the scope, but to operate within its command structure that it has been for a very long period of time under this administration, I think that is more beneficial than having someone that is at the top sitting and dictating military policy from point to point. Because I think that oftentimes what we happen to forget is politicians aren't in the line of fire, and they're not in the military a lot of times, and we don't necessarily know and understand the concerns of the men and women in the armed forces. And what is important is whenever our military leaders or members of the military come to us with concerns and things of that nature, that we sit and we try to work with them to resolve them and take their ideas into consideration and try to put them into effect. Because personally, they have more knowledge than we do as politicians. And I think that it is important to have a military that is controlled by the command staff instead of having politicians dictate what they are doing.
Okay, so I would like to touch on Clark's statements that he's going to further regulate military command. That's the problem. That's why we're losing the military vote, is we're regulating the military command when it's not needed. This is what they're rebelling against. This is why they don't want Clements owning the group. It's because they are tired of things happening to them out of their control. They just want to do their jobs. They want to enjoy their time within D.C., within the U.S. group, and they want to be able to take part in this group, go to D.C. And actually have fun. And this is the basic consensus of not only our soldiers, but everyone around, that we are not giving them the resources they need, or we're overregulating them. The military command does not need to be charged with like a felony or anything. I don't really know what Mr. Clark is aiming at here for being insubordinate to the founder. Being insubordinate to the president, that should be under military law. But we're not fixing anything by continuing to throw stuff on them that they're already against. This is why the military command staff is blatantly for the UP. This is why we're losing their vote. And, overregulating any department is going to hurt us in the long run. I don't see that this U.S. Code Amendment doing anything for us, but I do congratulate him again on actually doing something for once.
So, Mr. Warren, which one is it? Do you support the military or do you support the Constitution?
I support the Constitution. I have...
Okay, then the group shall be under the ownership of the founder.
You're not going to put them in prison for not agreeing with it.
Well, that wasn't
without charging people or threatening them with prison, because we actually came to a consensus that we can all agree on. It doesn't have to be me. That's my job, is threatening them with putting them in prison if they don't want to do it. I'm not going to sit here and do that. I will not charge them for that unless it's a very serious offense, which that yesterday was not a serious offense. It was
in violation of the Constitution.
But putting them in prison without any constitutional ability, without any charge under our U.S. code, is not allowed. There's nothing in our U.S. code to allow anyone to put them in prison, and I personally will not sign any document putting them in prison for something like that.
Well, let's look more further into the situation I think that what we need to do as a commander-in-chief is something that I attempted to do and something I'm going to continue to attempt to do, is try to work with the military leadership, listen to their concerns whenever it comes to the regards of this group ownership issue, and try to find a way that we can come to an agreement without strong-arming them, because the issue a lot of times is sometimes if something occurs that the founder or overseers do not agree with, sometimes they get a little emotional and they make threats. And I think that that's very disappointing sometimes, but they're humans and they make mistakes. But what I think is important for a commander-in-chief to do is to sit and try to bring military leadership and the group management together at the table and try to come to an agreement that both sides can agree on, instead of putting this issue through the courts and having it a my way or the highway approach, because that's not how we're going to get anywhere. And that all that's going to do is going to continue to further divide this country and cause more issues than solve them. So what I think is important is I, as vice president, and I'm sure that many other individuals within the administration, will continue to persist to try to forge an agreement that both sides can agree on whenever it comes into the concern of this issue, and try to find ways in the future, if issues such as this come about in the future, that we sit and we work together and try to come to an agreement instead of strong-arming people into doing what we want by threatening them with the Constitution and imprisonment and things of that nature.
Well, and I can completely agree. Yesterday we came. Okay, well, I don't need the back talk here. Yesterday we came to an agreement, and Pierre now owns the Navy and Marine groups. We don't need to charge General Rosie or Admiral Corbett.
I agree.
Anything if they're willing to come to an agreement, and they did yesterday, and we're now over the situation. But still, we have detractors who want to go against the military as a whole. We're going to lose the military vote if we just do stuff like that. I don't think that anybody personally should be proposing amendments to the U.S. Code without at least consulting with prosecutors or anything like that. That's the last I'll say about this. But I completely agree with you, Mr. Kaine. Let's not strong arm people into doing something, and instead let's try to come to a consensus that we can all agree on.
I'm glad that we can agree on agreeing on this.
And I can also agree with Mr. Kaine about the Secretary of Defense. I believe the Secretary of Defense should not have a pure role in the armed forces. Yes, they are there to oversee. Yes, they are to give advice to the president. But it should be the command staff of the military. They know what they're doing. They are on the field every day. They are talking with their troops. More or less, the Secretary of Defense could be a messenger of sorts. But then their opinion shall weigh heavily when it comes to discussing issues with the president.
All right, we need to wrap this up like a Christmas present, so I'm going to pass this over to Mr. Breslin for the next question.
All right, before we wrap up the questioning portion of the debate, there is one final question that we'd like to direct to all candidates on stage. In simple terms, tell the primary voters at home why you are the best candidate to defeat the Unitarian and Republican nominees and not your opponent on stage with you. Attorney General Warren, we'll begin with you.
Well, I think this is a very important question. I believe I asked before another debate that this should be put into it. The fact is, we're not identifying with the average voter, and the average voter is now going to other parties, such as the UP and the GOP. So what instead we need to do is we need to have someone who has done their jobs, who can reflect on that, and I believe I'm the best person within the Democratic Party to do so. I've served within the military, I've served within law enforcement, and I'm proud to have done that. My proudest job that I've done in this group is MPD chief. So I've worked with them closely. They're the ones who I work with every day. So I listen to their concerns every day. I listen to the Secret Service leadership, which I talked with a member of the Secret Service leadership yesterday, and he is just tired of how the Democrats just ignore the real problems in this country. Instead, they regulate Congress and they pass standing rules, which I don't see much other than that. And we try to get our legislation count up, and I think that goes for both parties. So no real legislation is being passed, and I've pledged myself before to pass real legislation that will actually affect the average American every time I put up legislation. I I do think that I'm the best one to reflect with people outside of our party, to independents, and even to primary voters who currently don't support me. I can bring this party together. I do believe that, and I can bring this country together if I'm elected as president.
Senator Clark, your response to the question?
The UP is gaining presence in Congress, yes, but I do not believe they have enough momentum in the public to win the generals. Though I wouldn't never not to work with them. Bipartisanship would be a prominent aspect in my administration, if elected. The UP, they have some interesting individuals, and I've worked with them in Congress. I actually enjoy working with them. But if Roman Steele is their nominee, I believe that he could possibly make a good president, but I do not believe he would have the chance. And the way to combat them, I believe that was in the question, correct?
Senator Clark. The question was, why would you make the best candidate to defeat the Unitarian and Republican nominees and not your opponents on stage with you?
Okay. The UP is a new party as well. With us Democrats, we've been here for a while, and I believe they're now kind of getting in the hang of how a party runs. And I don't know how a party runs, and the Democrats, we know what we're doing. We know how to run an administration. And I believe that the members of the UP party don't have that kind of knowledge of such.
Okay, Senator Clark, thank you. And finally, Vice President Kaine.
I believe that both gentlemen on this stage are very unique individuals, and they are very intelligent, and they are great people. But if I didn't believe that I didn't have differences with them, and I didn't believe that I would make a better president than either of them, I wouldn't be in this race. I do think that both of them would make a better president than Mr. Gatsby. I have said this before, and I will repeat it again till the day I die. But I think that the quality that sets me over the other candidates on this stage is I actually have a track record of bringing people together across party lines and coming to a consensus of how we can work together. I've worked with the Speaker to pass legislation. I've worked with Unitarian members, Republican members, independent members of all political parties in both chambers of Congress, and I have sat them down and I've worked together with them to try to pass legislation and find ways to help progress this nation forward. And if you look at my campaign, I have individuals within my campaign chat who are members of the Democratic Party, Unitarian Party, Republican Party, and even independents who are supporting my campaign because they believe that I am the one on this stage that has the track record of putting my money where my mouth is whenever it comes in terms of unity, because I believe that that is very important whenever it comes to leadership in this country. So I think that what sets me apart from the other candidates on the stage is I actually have a track record of working together, and I will continue to do so because I think that we, in the words of Hillary Clinton, I do believe that we are stronger together. And if we work together, we can find ways that we can work together to actually try to improve the current state of our domestic affairs and even our foreign affairs, how we can try to progress it forward. I think that's important. So I thank you for the question. I think that was a very, very important one. And I hope I answered it to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. To wrap up, we will now move to closing statements, and selected by random draw, Vice President Kaine will deliver his closing remarks.
Once again, I would like to thank the moderators for hosting tonight's debate, my opponents for a very fruitful discussion on the issues and how we can set ourselves apart on them, but also work together. And I would also like to thank the viewers for tuning in to tonight's debate. I hope that tonight we answered the questions that you might have and concerns of how we are different as candidates and our plans to fix this nation and progress it forward. I hope that if I am elected president and through this campaign, we can continue the progress we've made of bringing people together for the common cause of unity, because I think that is what is important, is having a united front to progress this nation forward to a new era of hope, prosperity, and tranquility. So I thank both of my opponents tonight for joining me, and I look forward to the next 2 days of spirited campaigning. And I'd like to thank once again everyone for tuning in, and have a wonderful night.
Attorney General Warren, your closing statement.
Who? You were lying for me, at least.
Attorney General Warren, your closing.
Okay, so I do thank everyone here for participating, and also the audience. I think I've made my message very clear over the past few debates. I'm for the average American. I'm for the average law enforcement officer, the military. But I'm not going to exploit your vote. I'll let you choose who you think would be best. And I do think that the average American can reflect with me more than anyone else in this race or within the Democratic Party. I think it's about time we turn things around and actually have a message that reflects upon their beliefs, and not just what we want. And I believe that for too long we've ignored their needs, and now they're going back on us because they don't believe that we're doing what is best for the group. And I can understand that. I don't agree with the idea that Democrats aren't working for the best of it. I believe the number was the Unity Party has 48% control of the seats in Congress, and they've only passed legislation for about 20%, 7% of the entire threshold. I don't think it's so much of us bringing substance. I think it's more of us losing our way. And I do think that I would be the best person to not only bring this party back together, but bring people back to the party. And once I win the presidency, to work towards the reform that I've talked about all throughout this campaign. I do think that any person that is competing with me on the stage tonight can do the same, and I will support them along their path to do it. I will make sure my input is duly noted. So on the 26th, whenever we get out to vote, I do ask that you elect me Democrats, because I think it's the best thing for the party, even if you have some animosity towards myself.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. And Senator Clark, your closing remark.
Sorry if you hear the dog barking. If elected, with the administration that I have established with proper, authentic opinion from the public, we would efficiently halt, all the issues that we have created. We need to look back and notice what policies, laws, departments, and etc. need dependable repairing. Then, once my and your administration complete that goal, we would develop items and such that would make our group more exceptional than our nation has ever seen before. I really look forward to see how this plays out in the next 2 days, and I hope the whole party unifies at the end. I look forward to seeing another Democrat in the White House, and to add, during this school term, lots of things will hopefully be changed per your opinion, you, the American people. My campaign is based off of improvement. We have to stop creating more issues that just piles up in the end. We all decide how we're going to fix that once. We need to improve the way we go. We need to improve along the way. We need to make sure that we're all doing this together. Otherwise, we are not creating the United States that we hope to create. That is all. Thank you.
This concludes the third and final Democratic debate.
Can we shake hands?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Oh, I'm shaking Colton and Mr. Clark's hand right now, if you can't tell.
I'm whispering in his ear that he's an establishment crook.
Oh,
You're doing a phenomenal job.
And I'm face palming.
I apologize. I thought this debate needed some lighthearted humor, so.
Well, I appreciate the levity, Mr. Vice President. Thank you to all candidates for coming out tonight and participating in these discussions. We hope that the series of debates helped you at home decide which candidate you will vote for in this Saturday's primary election.
As always, thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to complete our exit poll to be released on the EUSA Discord main channel momentarily. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on Saturday, August 26th on Election Day.
Good night, America.
God.